When a pop culture phenomena grows to a certain size, lampoons and spoofs of its tropes are inevitable. The culture of tabletop role-playing games is no different. The best examples feature all the art, layout, and rules of a more bog-standard game, twisted into a chaotic mocking reflection of its inspiration. And I know the thumbnail said HoL on it, but bear with me, this MORK BORG footage will become relevant later. Sort of. A bit. Yeah, the opening music can start any time now. The early 90s was an interesting time for tabletop role-playing games. Companies like TSR, White Wolf, and Games Workshop paved the path for a whole cottage industry of alternatives, some of which were fascinating if flawed experiments in ludonarrative math. Others were showcases of eye-catching art, and then there were a lot of these cheap black and white things whose entire creative process seemed to be Brian looking at Cool Brian and going, "Hey, I got a cracked copy of Aldous PageMaker and we know almost 2 people who can draw, so let's do this." Well, since Cool Brian demanded they get it done in 4 months to catch the next local con, and none of the Bryans had ever written anything longer than a tortilla recipe, they needed their game to be easy to write. With a writing challenge like that, parodies are a common go-to. I am by no means knocking the great craft of ribbing what's popular, and I'm sure it's a total coincidence that poking fun at an existing thing is easier than explaining a new original thing well enough for your jokes to land. All that's to say, Occupied Landfill, or HoL for short, published in 1994 by Dirt Merchant Games, was a subversive barb aimed directly at that type of TTRPG. My opening allusions to MORK BORG are a bit misleading, but I feel they're not entirely off base. They're both loud middle fingers of a game with their knuckles pointed squarely at the very genre to which they belong. Both had small teams of passionate lunatics whose layout and style challenged the foundational elements of the genre just as much as the content itself. But of course, MORK BORG is, among many other things, a bit of a sacred cow. So I suspect a lot of the pushback I'm going to get will be fellow oldies saying, whoa, hold up, Chief, there's no comparison here. For one thing, MORK BORG is actually playable. And sure, if you're going to insist that tabletop role-playing games be well-balanced, equitable experiences with clear win-loss conditions based on straightforward and quantifiable goals like some kind of sexy nerd, then sure, I guess HoL is automatically disqualified out the gate for literally encouraging the GM to cheat. But here's the thing, I come from the camp of objectively sexier nerds who don't consider all the tables and dice rolling and such to just be competitive math for bonking orcs with swords. Instead, I think of the systems in play as being there to give half-inebriated improv goobers an impassionate and impartial framework for resolving narrative forks in the story path. That's a thing HoL could do, and it did it in the anarchic spirit it was trying to project. Now, I say spirit because it only barely meets the letter of that goal. It does have some rather low-bar TTRPG problems, even if we're going full narrativist here. There's this weird thing I noticed in a lot of indie books at a time, where they'd cram a ton of unique world building into their books, but forget to give the player characters a clear narrative role in any of it. HoL even went one extra step by making a bunch of the world building openly irrelevant to its own setting. And for the life of me, I can't decide if this is meta-satire or just another example. The overarching baddie of this setting is the Confederacy of Worlds, or COW. Get it? And their whole deal is basically the Imperium from Warhammer 40k, but if it was, like, conceived by anti-capitalist punks who learned desktop publishing instead of electric guitar. The COW had this whole spiraling multi-galaxy empire, conquered by ultra-violent force, kept passive by a religious fast food organization called the Church and Munch, and traversed with the space-folding energies generated by giant man-eating slugs doing the wild thing. Yes, hurtling through space with the power of invertebrate space humping is a thing in this universe, and it, like so many other fascinating elements of HoL, is detailed, puerile, delightfully illustrated, and ultimately irrelevant. Again, this might be a pose law thing, or a joke I'm just not nerd sexy enough to play along with, but after lore dumping a farcical capitalist giga society from which an infinite number of 2000 AD worthy stories could be told, it explains that your character will be trapped on a garbage planet a bazillion light years away from any of it. Which isn't to say Planet HoL isn't itself given the old info overload treatment. HoL is the universe's garbage dump / penal colony, hence the acronym, Human Occupied Landfill, and the characters are prisoners serving a life sentence. Like the universe it's nowhere near, HoL has a ton of its own lore, history, factions, monsters, landmark locations, even its own local currency, which, like virtually everything else on this planet, is just waiting for the least convenient time to do terrible things to your character's vital organs. But then when you dare to ask questions like, so aside from being eaten alive by pocket change, what will characters be doing in all of this? You are answered by 2 pages containing a half dozen short, broad-stroke plot hooks that boil down to have the PCs go see things and react to them. So why, despite this front-loaded griping, did I say HoL is more playable than early players gave it credit for? Well, as I revealed in previous videos, I'm the kind of person who can find fun in big rigs, Doom Snap Map, and Palladium books. The secret there, as always, is the BYOF principle. If a game brings a basically functional framework to the party, then a sufficiently sexy nerd can fill in the rest with their own creativity. And HoL's system was functional, but like most things in the book, its primary purpose is to mock the things it looks like, so its functionality is more side effect than prescribed indication. The subversive joke behind HoL's stats, you see, they have silly irreverent names like Grey Matter and Nuts, but in a way that outdoes Palladium because you could actually use the stats for stuff, largely by pairing them with skills whose comedically overlong names would run me afoul of the auto-censor bots on this dripping boil-ridden cloaca of a platform on which you can like and subscribe this video. Please and thank you. In any case, even if gamers at the time struggled to make sense of HoL's superglued shark chum of a system, it was clearly enthusiastic about engaging with TTRPG fans in other ways, such as subverting the parts that they love and by poking fun at the more tedious bits. For one thing, the entire book was written and drawn in black markers. None of that hoity-toity typesetting and fonts and spell checking over here. Nothing says passion project on the verge of insanity quite like blocks of lopsided handwritten text, where the spelling and grammar mistakes that aren't scribbled out are lampshaded by little self-deprecating parentheticals and snotty footnotes. This alone was what helped me discover that my favorite art is outsider art, specifically the kind that forsakes precision for passion. There was something cathartic, even inspirational, about watching HoL's 3-person writing team boldly and sloppily lose their minds for 140 pages. Now, in retrospect, some aspects I'll just briefly describe as a product of its time. Yes, Gen Z and Alpha, your parents used to think pervert priests were a completely cromulent joke to share with their friends. Hindsight cringe notwithstanding, I do appreciate how HoL manages to carve out its own identity with the humor. Take, for example, the Wasteums. They're these cute little teddy bear looking things that don't so much breed as happen. Sort of like if Tribbles were full of tapioca instead of meat. And they serve as the game's way of explaining why your characters don't starve to death, because Wasteums are basically an edible infestation. Their visual design is in line with the sort of cutesy on its surface irreverence common to Hot Topic at the time. But of course, since HoL is a crapsack planet, and we just can't have nice things that aren't trying to turn our hit points into hot poop, there's a visually identical critter called a Wasted, which instead of being full of delicious food, is full of razor-sharp teeth. It's functionally HoL's version of a mimic, only instead of the booby trap being glittery golden jewels, it's the most common foodstuff on a garbage planet. I like this because in addition to giving the game a fun mascot and some additional world building, it manages to be its own thing. I'm not going to pretend every element of HoL is this well realized, but as a person who appreciates the free-for-all anarchic creative spirit of game books like MORK BORG, I find HoL to be not only fun to read, but creatively inspiring. As for recommendations, well, if you're the kind of person who wants a chaotic goof around with your pals, or you just want to wax nostalgic about the peculiarities of 90s era gaming, back before the term gamer got ganked by the Xbox kids, then maybe give it a look-see. But you really gotta go into it with the right attitude. You're not likely to get a sprawling space opera campaign out of this thing. At best, you'll get some irreverent and potentially gross in-jokes born from a loopy one-shot. I guess you could say, it fills a very specific hole. Okay, that can't be my go-home gag. Jeez, I knew I shouldn't have tried to write jokes before lunch. I better just grab myself a quick snack here and take another whack at— Oh my God!